Hi students! In this lesson, we're going to cover our big idea, which is working non-destructively in Photoshop. We'll use smart objects, layer masks, and adjustment layers to do this. I'll also cover file setup using different artboards to create your style frames, how to work with vector, and then last but not least, how to export your artboards and put together a design board. Okay, our first step is to open Adobe Photoshop and get our file set up with 6 artboards so we can design our 6 style frames. So we're going to do Command N to create a new file. Go under Film and Video, select 1080p, HDTV, name our file, make sure it's 1920 by 1080, and click Artboards. And that'll allow us to have an artboard to start with. Hit Create, and we have an artboard 1 here. So once I click the folder, and then make sure I select the artboard tool, I can add 2 more artboards to the right, and to add an artboard below artboard 1, I have to go back and make sure I select that folder, click artboard, and then 2 more to the right. So now we have 6 artboards set up so we can design our 6 style frames. Each one of those artboards has its own individual folder, and when you're designing each one of your style frames, make sure your layers are labeled and put into each one of these appropriate folders. Okay, I quickly want to go over just what working destructively looks like and the 3 things I usually see used. One is the wand. So if I want to cut our young woman out here, a lot of times what I'll see is the wand used to make a selection and then just simply deleting what's not needed. So that's one practice I see. Another practice is just using the eraser tool and cutting her out the same way. Or if I want to put a vignette on our young lady, I come in and I just directly paint on top of the image. Now the main reason why working destructively is not the best practice is once I save this, I simply cannot go back and make any edits. In the rest of the lesson, I'm going to show you why working non-destructively with smart objects, with layer masks, and with adjustment layers are really crucial to being able to make edits to your designs. Okay, now's a good time to save our file. So I have a title transformation folder, and I also have a assets folder. So again, all your photographs and raster images should be in here. Just gonna save before we move on any further. Now there's 2 ways to place our smart object into our style frames. If we go under File, Place Embedded, this will embed our image into our style frames PSD. Place Linked will link to our assets folder and then to our image file that we're selecting. So linked is crucial not to move your assets out of the folder because it's linking to them just like they would in Illustrator or in InDesign. So for this example, I'm going to do Place Embed. And I'm going to select my first file and hit place. Now in the artboard 4, because I had it selected, that's where it will place my image file. Now I'm going to scale up my image to get a nice crop. something like this, hit return, and now I've placed my smart object in my PSD file. Now if I double click this, it will open the actual original image, and if I swap out or edit this in any way, it will update in my PSD file. I also want to point out that the image itself, I scaled it up in our Style Frames PSD. The image is 2500 pixels by about 1700 pixels tall. So you don't want to scale up your image in your actual file unless that image itself is a larger res image, higher resolution image. Also, if you plan to do any zooming or panning within your title sequence animation, you want to make sure that if I was going to zoom into this gun or zoom into our young lady, that the image itself is 2 or 3 times larger than the actual 1920 by 1080. The main reason is to make sure that the file itself does not pixelate. Alright, I just need to place my second image I'm going to work with. It says flag image here. Just going to scale this up as well. And turn that image off. And now we're ready to start to work with some layer masks. Using a layer mask is a perfect example of how to work non-destructively in Photoshop. In the previous example, I showed you destructively meant to just use the wand and select and delete out the pixels in the image you didn't need. Working non-destructively allows us to keep the original image and create a separate layer that allows us to do our edits. A layer mask is usually used to separate the image from the background, but it's also a simple way of cutting out an image to create collages as well. So there's a couple ways I can make a selection to create my layer mask, and I'm going to go through those. First is starting with the lasso tool. I'll just zoom in really quickly. Lasso's simple. You can just draw around, and that's a simple way to make a selection. Another way is to use the polygon lasso tool, and this is really great for anything that might be geometric, or if you're just trying to make a quick selection, this works as well. The next tool I want to show you is you can actually use the pen tool to make a quick selection. And the pen tool is really good because you can actually zoom way in and draw details with curves, so it works just the same way as if you were using the pen tool in Illustrator. So again, connect the point, and now I can make a mask the same way. And last but not least, the quick selection tool. And I can come in here and quickly select and create a mask. So you can see, because I usually use the quick selection tool, but because I have such a dark image, it's actually really challenging to use it to make a selection. So in this case scenario, I'll probably just use the basic lasso tool to make my initial selection, and then combine that with the brush. So now that I've made my selection, and I want to add a little bit more, so if I want to add more to a selection, I hold Shift. If I want to add less, I hit Option. So this is a quick way to make edits. So again, Shift to add, Option to subtract, and then I'm going to hit Select and Mask. and it'll give you a bunch of tools like how to smooth out the image, how to add contrast, you can add feather, and so on. You want to output to a layer mask and hit OK. And you'll realize here that you have a layer mask that you can work on and in your original image. So you can see that my cutout isn't quite perfect. So what I like to do as a technique is select the brush tool, set it about at 50%, or depending on what kind of image you're working with and the type of background, you may play around with opacity to get it to blend perfectly. And then a lot of times I like to select a softer hardness on the brush, so set at 0 if I'm trying to blend it. If I'm trying to make a sharp edge, I'll select the one that has 100 or change the hardness to 100. And what that does is it'll do a really hard edge cutout versus, again, if I use a brush with a hardness set at 0, it will blend it more. So what I do is I would come in here, and again, if your foreground color is set to black, what it will do is it will blend the image in with the background. It will literally erase pixels. If I bring my foreground color to white, it will paint those pixels back in. So this is a quick way, especially if I'm working with hair, to be able to blend and work with the nuance of the pixels that happen here. So I'll probably come in and use a smaller brush. So if you use the brackets on the right, it increases the brush. On the left, it decreases. So I can kind of come in here and also cut some of the hair out and blend some of the hair into the background image as well. So again, it's usually a combination of the quick select tool and the brush for myself, but you can also use the pen to make a selection or the lasso tool. Again, it's whatever you're comfortable with and whatever gives you really good control and the best image in the end. Now I'd like to add the flag to our design. So I'm just going to select it. Under blend modes, select overlay. And what I'm going to do differently with the flag is I'm going to actually layer and blend it over our young woman with the gun. Again, the gun, we created a selection and created a layer mask that separated it from the background. For the flag, we're just going to use the brush and try to blend it in with our young woman and gun. So if I come down here to the bottom and hit add layer mask, hit B for my brush, I'm going to start with a opacity at 100 so I can just start to erase right off the bat. I want my focal point to be the gun, so I want to get the flag out of the gun, and this actually allows it to come to the foreground. And I find it kind of distracting through the arm here that the flag is in place. It kind of flattens our whole image. So what I'm going to do is come through here and actually take the flag out. And this allows the arm and the gun to come into the foreground, and the flag blends with the young woman, pushing it to the background. So again, I'm going to come in with a 100% brush and start to blend these out. And then I'm going to push that brush down to 50 to start with and start to blend it out in the image. I think it's a little bit hot around the end of the hair here, so I'm going to start to blend that out. And then I think it's just a little bit too much on the face and around the neck. So I'm just going to push that back just a little bit. So now we're using the brush as a way to blend one image to the next. So again, in summary, you can use a layer mask to cut an image out and start to collage things together. But you can also use a layer mask to layer another image over using blend mode, and also using an opacity brush to blend the two images together. Okay, let's work with some adjustment layers. An adjustment layer adds color and tonal adjustments to your image without permanently changing your image. So to get started, we'll go under Window and select Adjustments. Should have a palette like this that has curves, hue and saturation, and black and white. If these things look familiar, under Image, they're the same adjustments that you can make. And that's how we would work destructively. If we go Image, Adjustments, and do Curves, it's going to apply right on the image layer. If we use an adjustment layer and select Curves, it actually puts the adjustment above the layer that we're working on. So I'm going to use Curves for this example. Select the Hand tool, which allows us to select a region of the image and adjust that. And I'm going to do the shadows and maybe pull that up a little bit. So any part of your image that you want to make an adjustment to, just use the hand, select that area. If you pull down, it darkens. If you pull up, it brightens it. The other thing that's really good to know is if you select this button here, it will attach that adjustment to that image below. If you don't select it, it will apply it to every layered image below that adjustment layer. So again, I'm going to attach it to my gun. And the second adjustment that I would like to add is black and white. So I'm going to click the black and white adjustment, and it's going to apply to both layers. And again, you can go in here and adjust the tonal quality of your black and white. And if I just want to attach it to the flag, because our flag is the only thing that's currently in color, I can do that as well. So that's just a quick overview of how to use the adjustment layer. So I'm going to go over a couple ways you can use vector within Photoshop. The most basic way is using the shape tool, and you have rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, and the line tool. In this example, I'm just going to use the ellipse because I'm going to create a spotlight effect that helps focus on the gun. Hold Shift to draw a spotlight circle. Change that fill to white, and then set the blend mode to overlay. I'm going to scale that up a little bit and crop it a little bit better. Something like that. Hit return. The other way I can work in Photoshop is use the pen tool. And the pen tool has all the same features that it does in Illustrator. And last but not least, you can actually import and place your Illustrator designs that you create into Photoshop. And that may be more comfortable for a lot of you. If you're not used to drawing with the pen tool in Photoshop, it's probably easier to actually use Illustrator and import and combine your designs. So I'm just going to go over how to do that. So in Illustrator, I've created just a really basic 2-icon design, and I'm going to place that with Place Embedded in my Artboard 5 here. Select my Illustrator file and place it, and hit OK. And now we have our Illustrator file in Photoshop, and it's placed it as a smart object, which is really awesome. So anytime I double click that smart object, it actually will open in Illustrator. Then any changes that I tweak and I make, so let's say I adjust the columns and make it a real mess, if I save it, when I jump back to Photoshop, it automatically updates it in the Photoshop file on the fly. So again, this is a really awesome feature from Adobe and how the two products connect back and forth from Illustrator to Photoshop. So if you're really used to doing a lot of your design work in Illustrator that you're using vector, this is a great way to connect your file from Illustrator to Photoshop. So my last fun tip is for those of you that use the clone stamp and the spot healing brush a lot. You may actually edit on your image when you use those tools, and there's a non-destructive way of doing that, a better way. If we create a new layer above the layer we want to edit, so I want to edit the stars out of the flag, just going to put a layer above, select the spot healing brush, and then actually edit out some of the stars that I don't like. Again, what's awesome about this is it's on its own layer above my image, so I can do multiple tests of what I'm cloning out and then select the best example. So the last step I want to add in my style frame design is a vignette, and there are so many different ways of accomplishing that. I'm just going to show you two quick ways of doing it. So I'm going to add a layer. Make sure that layer is above all my design layers for my Artboard 4. I'm just going to fill it with black. So Option Delete fills the foreground color. Add a layer mask. Select my brush tool, and I can just simply come in and brush in the mask. Another way is to use curves. So I can come in here, make the mask with the adjustment layer, then come in and brush in my highlights. So again, nice thing about using the layer mask is you can turn them on and off to find which one you think is the best solution for your design. So I've jumped ahead and finished designing all of my style frames, including adding type. The type tool is the same in Photoshop as it is in Illustrator and also InDesign. The two things I haven't covered is one, making sure you're always saving your file as you're working along, and number two, making sure you're always labeling your layers so that when you import it into After Effects, you know what you're working with. So all we have to do is go under File and Export, and we want to do Artboards to Files, and this is going to make a PNG of each one of our style frames. And I just want to target my folder. So I created a design board folder. So again, we're taking all of our style frames and putting them together in a design board. Just going to hit open. Make sure that you click off the selected artboards so that it exports every one of them, and select PNG 24. You don't need transparency, and you should click on interlaced and hit run. And what we'll do is it will cycle through and export each one of your style frames as PNG files. Now when we look in our title transformation folder under design board, we should have all 6 of our style frames, and we're ready to do the same process we did as newsworthy and import each one of those PNGs into our InDesign design board and upload that to Google Drive. Our lesson has now come to an end. Our big idea was working non-destructively using smart objects, layer masks, and adjustment layers. We also covered how to work with vector and how to import our Illustrator files into Photoshop. And last but not least, how to export our style frames as PNGs and put together our design boards. I wish you all the best of luck on your style frames. Have fun and happy designing.